Excellencies, dear colleagues, we are starting the teleconference. Let me warmly welcome you to the teleconference on current issues of international humanitarian law in conflicts, which is being co-organized by 3 diplomatic capitals, Vienna, Moscow, and Geneva. The relevance of this topic for us is intertwined with the fact that as the territories of the Russian Federation are liberated, numerous evidences of violations of the fundamental provisions of IHL against civilians by the armed forces of Ukraine are being revealed. And above all, its central postulate, according to which the right of combatants to choose their means and methods of warfare is not unlimited. Regarding the Kursk region, we are talking about targeted killings, violence, and torture of the civilian population, which are often contracted. Recently, cruel attacks against civilians in Chasov Yar, Selidova, and Avdiivka in the Donetsk People's Republic have received wide publicity. At the same time, in terms of the number of munitions fired by the enemy at civilian targets, the most depressing statistics is registered in the Belgorod region of the Russian Federation. Today, we would like to share with you, colleagues, relevant first-hand information. And to this end, we are organizing a live broadcast from Kursk and Donetsk. One of the important issues for today's discussion is also related to how international organizations, including the UN and the OSCE, respond to these most serious IHL violations by Ukrainian armed forces against civilians. I would like to draw attention to the fact that we are having the event in the Zoom format. We kindly ask the esteemed online participants to keep their microphones off. You will be able to request the floor and ask questions to the speakers after the main part of the event by using the raise hand function. And now I would like to give the floor to Ambassador at Large of the Russian Foreign Ministry, Mr. Rodion Miroshnik. In 2015-2022, he represented the Lugansk People's Republic in the political subgroup of the Contact Group on Ukraine, trying to find political and diplomatic solutions for the future peaceful coexistence of Donbass and Ukraine. He held the post of ambassador of the LPR to Russia and an advisor to the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation. Today, he will share with us valuable information based on the results of his visit to the Kursk region bordering Ukraine. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Thanks a lot. Ladies and gentlemen, the main idea that I would like to outline to distinguished international community in my address is that we're absolutely positive and we have many months of monitoring and collective facts. The Kiev political leadership is deliberately and intentionally uses the banned forms and means of war. It applies terrorist toolkit in order to achieve its criminal goals at the state level. They destroyed the civilian population, they commit atrocities, looting, and deliberately destroy civil infrastructure. They show complete all permissiveness and impunity, and by doing so, they seek to scare the civilians, create unbearable living conditions, and affect the domestic policy of the Russian state. At the same time, the Kiev regime is completely sure that it will not bear any responsibility for committed war crimes, as they rely on unofficial guarantees of state sponsors of the bloodshed. And so far, state sponsors of Ukrainian crimes try to live up to their commitments. They block all attempts to hold international investigations of the crimes of the Kiev regime. We have enough evidence from Ukrainian fighters detained by Russia, and they gave evidence that they got direct orders and instructions to kill civilians. And please direct your attention to the screen.
Территории Курской области когда оказался?
2 числа.
Какой приказ был?
Стрелять в лысы, короче, не наши.
Мирные попадались тебе, гражданские люди?
Попадались.
С ними что делали? Какой приказ был, если попадутся?
Тоже расстреливали.
Ты расстреливал?
Расстреливал.
У нас був наказ такий, світсько-російськомовний. У нас наказ був ту жінку вбити.
Ми не самі це зробили, нам наказали вбити її. Ми зробили це.
Кто наказал?
Командир.
Ставились ли вам какие-либо задачи относительно мирного населения?
Так точно.
Какие именно?
Кто будет стрелять по них?
Вы какие-либо преступления в отношении мирных граждан Курской области совершали?
Так точно.
Какие и когда?
20-го мужчину выстрелил.
Почему вы произвели в него выстрел?
По приказу командира.
У нас была одна задача. Убивать русских, в плен никого не брать. Они не люди.
Освобождение территории из-под контроля украинского режима вскрывает сейчас
As
множество...
territories were liberated from the Ukrainian control, a lot of evidence was exposed of crimes committed by the Kiev regime fighters. One of the outrageous facts is the mass shooting down of civilians in the city of Selidovo in the DPR. Representatives of Ukrainian armed units in October 2024, just several days before leaving the city, claimed that nobody's on their side here, and those who intend to stay are collaborators that look forward to the Russian troops returning. Survived witnesses confirmed in their evidence that fighters of the Ukrainian armed forces openly claim that when they leave the city, they will not keep anyone alive. The Ukrainian regime organized shooting squads. They patrolled deserted cities, killing everyone they met. They committed raids at flats and basements and shot down everyone they found. Forward units of the armed forces of Russia entered the city and found at the streets of Selidovo dozens of civilians shot down point blank. According to survivors, it was all done by the Ukrainian armed forces a week before the liberation, a week before Russian troops came. And as evidence, I suggest you take a look at the short clip of an RT documentary. It was shot virtually 2 weeks after the liberation of the city, once the Ukrainian forces left the city.
Как раз справа это район Солнечный, где больше всего погибло мирных жителей. Их прям расстреливали там пачками. Люди пытались оттуда убежать, прятаться там особо негде, ну, подвалы маленькие. Они убегали на улице, а тут их и убивали.
Доставлен труп из Селидовского района, труп гражданский, неустановленного мужчины, без документов, с личными вещами, ключи. И труп у нас с огнестрельным ранением груди слева. На передней поверхности у нас входное отверстие, на задней поверхности выходное. И именно у данного трупа, труп ранее был осмотрен сотрудниками Следственного комитета, поэтому мы его уже осмотрели. И именно данный труп был расстрелян в упор. Были признаки того, что это ранение, произведенное в упор.
Угу. А возраст какой? Мужчины, женщины, дети там? Детей нет?
Все.
Отдельные фотоматериалы,
Some
которые были
footage
собраны корреспондентами RT,
that were collected by RT journalists and provided by the investigative bodies cannot be shown live for ethical concerns, but they are collected for private viewing. I ask you to use the QR code, and once you use your mobile devices to read the QR code, you will access the web source with photo and video footage, and you can ascertain for the crimes committed in Selidovo this autumn. This confirms the crimes of the fighters of the Ukrainian armed forces in the DPR territory. As of now, according to the investigative committee of Russia that investigates crimes in Selidovo, the number of civilians that were cynically killed by Ukrainian fighters that were leaving the city already exceeds 100. As the exhumation and investigation proceeds, this number will only grow. Unfortunately, the Selidovo tragedy is not a single case, nor is it outstanding. It is just a strategy put into practice that was chosen by the Kiev regime. As of now, in the liberated Russian cities Ruski, Porechny, in the Kursk region, over 30 bodies of killed and tortured civilians were found. You will have a chance today to hear first-hand evidence of people that lived through the horror of the Ukrainian occupation, the loss of their loved ones, and the story of how Ukrainian fighters tortured civilians that wanted to flee their control. Not so long ago in the Kupiansk area, 17 civilian bodies were found with traces of violent death. They were highly likely killed by Ukrainian fighters because they refused to flee their homes and move to the territory controlled by the Kiev regime, where nobody was waiting for them but radicals and fighters who wanted to deal with them due to their wrong political views. That's the way the Kiev regime implements its guideline not to leave anyone alive at the territory that they give up. Unlike the Ukrainian city of Bucha, which is initially a cynical staging that was prepared by Ukraine and foreign spin doctors, Selidovo, Rusko, Porechny, Chasov Yar, these are places of real murderous crimes of the Kiev regime, and the investigation is only beginning. It will be completed and it will be brought to a fair court. Besides executions of civilians and tortures over civilians, the track record of Ukrainian fighters includes a whole list of deliberate crimes. Primarily, I'm talking about active use of all weapons at their disposal to attack civil population and civil infrastructure. Overall, since February 2022, the Ukrainian armed forces shot some 230,000 munitions against civil infrastructure of various types and calibers. The overwhelming majority was supplied by the so-called Western strategic partners. To confirm what I'm talking about, I will show you the video footage that I shot personally over the past weeks as I visited the damaged civil infrastructure at the territory of the Kursk and Belgorod region. Please direct your attention to the screen.
Право буквально только отремонтированных. Посмотрите, что поделано. Видите, Венус, вы снимаете?
Я сам, да.
Ага.
Рассказывайте, да?
Школа.
Это то, что осталось от
травм. Памятник. Сделали памятник. Здесь проехать сложно.
Это населенный пункт Казинка.
Да, это населенный пункт.
слаженное действие, и помощь, конечно, от области была оказана всесторонняя.
Среди населенных пунктов, которые
Among
подвергаются
settlements
практически
that
ежечасно
witness virtually hourly shellings by the Ukrainian armed groups, I can name Gorlovka in the DPR, Shebekino-Gayvoron areas in the Belgorod region, Korenevsky, Belovsky, Bolshe-Soldatsky areas in the Kursk region, Kremenskoye and Svatovsky area in the LPR, Aloshka, Gahovka, Novaya Gahovka in the Kherson region, and a host of others. As for weaponry used most often by Ukraine against civil infrastructure, the most widely used is the 155mm NATO shells. The most murderous are artillery shells using cluster munition. Artillery shells are followed by the use of various types of UAVs. They make deliberate strikes against energy infrastructure, public places, and civil transport. The number of civilian casualties from UAV attacks is on the rise. Over the past years. The share of civilian casualties from UAVs reached 30%. That means every third civilian casualty was a result of a UAV attack. Strikes that lead to large-scale destruction of civilian infrastructure in deep, densely populated areas and settlements often are made using MLRS, including HIMARS, American HIMARS, Czech Vampire, and Turkish system Sakaya. Over the past months alone, Ukrainian MLRS attacked Donetsk, Gorlovka, Belgorod, Aloshka. Yesterday, there was an attack against a market in Veliki Kapana in the Kherson region, wounding and killing 4 people on site, including a teenager. 8 people were hospitalized with severe injuries. Just like yesterday, in the Kherson region, the Ukrainian armed forces target shopping malls, houses, public transport stops, and medical facilities. MLRS missiles are used to carry cluster munitions and to have a remote mining. By doing so, they infect civil territories by landmines and explosive devices. As of now, we have verified data on the number of civilians affected by the Ukrainian armed forces since February 2022. Let me say straightforward that all the data that we provide with an at least prefix, because the number of casualties is on the rise once the investigation proceeds.
Over the course of the last 3 years, the number of civilians who suffered from the crimes committed by the Ukrainian armed forces in the Russian regions exceeded at least 19.5 thousand. At least 13,200 were injured, including 830 underaged. At least 6.5 thousand died, including 215 underage people. Put simply, the numbers of the crimes committed by Ukraine is as follows. Every 6 minutes, some Russian civilian site was hit by a Ukrainian munition. Over the course of the last 3 years, 6 civilians died and 13 were injured. Every 24 hours of these 3 years, at least 1 child was injured or died. The international community should clearly understand that providing military assistance to Kiev means being an accomplice to launching artillery strikes against civilians and civilian sites in Donetsk, Belgrade, Kursk, Lugansk, and many other regions. Funding of the Zelensky regime is equal to providing the funds of taxpayers of their states to perpetrate crimes, violence, and other atrocities against Russian civilians. Blocking at the international level investigations and recognizing the facts of Kiev atrocities is not only the commitment to accept the atrocities and the terrorisms, but the tool at creating it at larger scales, because there is no more conducive environment that impunity. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Your Excellency, for the presentation. Colleagues, Kursk has joined us today, and we cordially welcome His Excellency, Acting First Deputy Governor of Kursk Region, Chairman of the Government of Kursk Region, Mr. Alexander Chepik. He is doing a tremendous work of supporting the civilian population of the region, which has faced the grave consequences of the invasion of the armed forces of Ukraine. Thank you so much that you are with us today, and please, Your Excellency, you have the floor.
The actions of Ukrainian armed forces triggered the mass banishing of civilians from the Kursk region. Since September 2024, the Minister of Defense evacuated many civilians with the Commissioner for Human Rights, Madam Maskalkova, together with the Russian Red Cross, brought 79 civilians, and the total number of the evacuated persons amounts to 316. The Ukrainian armed forces mine the civilian settlements. 265 entries and rescue missions were carried out with demining of 400 mines. More than 100 of improvised explosive devices were secured, were demined. These explosive devices are dropped by drones, and these efforts are complicated by the magnet contact systems, and they are dispersed across the civilian settlements. This is a direct threat to life and health of the civilians who come across them and who are not aware that they are dangerous. Since February 24, 2022, the number of injured amounts to 687, and 191 was injured. 124 were injured and were killed, and 24 were injured, including children. Thank you for your attention.
Mr. Chepik, thank you for your speech and for finding time for today's event in your busy schedule. Your assessments of the situation on the ground are extremely important for our international partners here in Europe. Colleagues, now we would like to give the floor to the civilians who have come face to face with the atrocities of the armed forces of Ukraine. Nina Fedorovna Kryukova joins us. She is a witness to the crimes of Ukrainian armed formations in Plyochova, Sudzha region of the Kursk region. Dear Nina Fedorovna, good afternoon. Thank you so much that you are with us today, and we are looking forward to hearing your personal story.
During the occupation, since August 9 to December 13, we suffered this occupation in the settlement of Krukova. On August 9, the Ukrainian armed forces came into our settlement. We were under constant attack during this period up to December 13. On September 13, my son was executed. We failed to leave due to his health condition. We were unable to leave, and that is why we had to stay. When on December 25, our house was put to fire and it was burned down. And we moved to a different street, to a different area of our settlement, and we lived there during this period. My son went down to the basement because we kept our food storage there. And on September 13, he was killed, he was executed, he was shot at head. There were 3 shots in his back. On December the 7th, it was a nightmare. We came under regular attacks, so we had to hide all the time. On December the 7th, the boys who lived with us, 7 families were living in one house, both men and women. We all lived in the same place. They went to get some water at a well, and it was mined, and they were killed. They were injured by the mine, and one of them now is in hospital in Moscow. Also, the people from the same street were going to a different well, men and women, and they were executed. When they were injured, a man lived on the same street, and we asked him for help. But when they approached the house, one boy named Volodya, when he approached the house, he heard a shot. He waited for 2 or 3 minutes after it all was seized, and then he entered the courtyard. This man was shot as well. We never saw the perpetrator. However, people were killed. We did not see the execution near the well. Later, they showed us the photos. We thought that they were missed. Perhaps they were brought to Ukraine, but it turned out that they were also executed near the well. On this day, December the 7th, 8 people were executed in one house. A man was shot down, and the house was set to fire, put on fire. His wife died. On December the 13th, we were brought to Belair. On December the 14th, we were brought to a safe area. There were 9 of us. All the time, we were under attack. We were afraid to go outside. We were afraid to look out of the window. Before that, they never hit us, they never executed us. When they saw us, they spoke Russian with us. My son came under attack 2 times. Once he was brought to Sumy, to Ukraine. He was interrogated. They were asking what he was working for. He explained that he had cancer and that he could not leave. He explained that he had been to hospital. They verified the data and they released him. It was on September the 2nd, and they let him free. And from their control point, they sent him to their side, and our side was mined. On September the 2nd,
вышел без этого, не подорвался ни на мине,
He
ни...
managed to escape. He did not hit the mine, but on September 13th, he came under attack eventually, and when he was killed, when he went down to the basement and he was killed after all, one of the guys is in hospital. One of those who suffered from a mine explosion on December the 7th. He's in hospital, but now he can walk at least. That's all that I can tell.
Nina Fedorovna, спасибо вам большое.
Nina Fedorovna, thank you very
I
much.
express to you the words of the sincerest support and wishes for good health. You have shown a true Kursk character.
Извините, пожалуйста, Вена, вас не слышно. Что-то со звуком.
Moscow, can you hear us?
Да, теперь слышим, спасибо.
Yes, now we can hear you.
Perfect. I would like to repeat that we, all our colleagues in Vienna, would like to express our words of support and our wishes of good health to Nina Fedorovna. We thank her cordially for her speech today. And I would like also to repeat that here in Vienna, we are holding for the first time the exhibition called The Kursk Character, the exhibition of the Russian documentary photographer Sergei Vinyavsky. Colleagues, now we are moving to Donetsk. Eduard Yuryevich Gorbatenko and his wife Natalia Fedorovna Gorbatenko, who were bombed by the Ukrainian armed forces from drones and by miracle survived the evacuation from Chasov Yar, will tell us their story. On the screens, you can see the video of how Ukrainian armed formations terrorized civilians and dropped ammunition on them from UAVs. And I would like to especially note that the Russian Arms Control Delegation to the Forum for Security Cooperation distributed this very evidence of this outrage by the Kiev regime among all the OSCE participating states and the Secretariat in November last year. Dear compatriots, the floor is yours.
Мы эвакуированы из Часовяра.
We were evacuated from Chasov Yar, and on the day when they told us to leave, well, we were going out. There were 7 of us. We had been living together for some time.
Конечно, очень тяжело это все вспоминать.
It is a difficult thing to recollect all of this.
Нас было 7 человек.
There were 7 of us,
Мы с мужем,
the husband and I,
Александр Михайловский,
Alexander Mikhailovsky, Igor Gorodets,
Сергей Нарышный,
Sergei
его мама
Naryshnik,
тетя Люба Нарышная.
his mother Naryzhna,
Был с нами
Lubov
мальчик,
Naryzhna, and also there was a boy with us,
вперед была погибла и убила дроном. Он
and
остался
his
с нами.
grandmother,
Олег,
who had been killed by a drone, and he stayed with us. His name was Oleg Duranov. There were 7 of us, and we were going Sergei originally was injured in his leg, and Igor and Alexander was carrying him on a wagon, and we were moving along the road. And when we came to the turn, they opened a fire against us. There was a severe shelling, and we were trying to hide from it. And then there came even a more massive attack. Later, they threw an explosive device at us. Everything was put to fire. Our neighbor was injured. We all were injured, and my head was on fire. Someone lost his leg, and we came to another shelter, and then they opened a fire against the shelter. They were carrying out constant attacks. The Russian military dropped medicine and water to us when we communicated to them that we had injured. We moved to a neighboring shelter, and it was on fire from the inside. We extinguished the fire. We took all the rubbish out, and we stayed there. However, they started a fire against this shelter, and opposite to the road there was another shelter. My husband and I went there. There was a minute pause. No drones fired attacks against us. And the other 3 people stayed in our previous shelter. My husband had been injured. And when we were together with my husband in our last shelter, a suicide drone came into our shelter and it exploded. We were injured. We took our documents with us, and we came out of the shelter. We decided that we would have been buried there if we had stayed. We hid under the bridge. We managed to go to the opposite side. A small dog was also with us. It has suffered a lot as well, but thanks God, now it is in sound health. We spent one day under the bridge, and in the evening, we ran to the plant. We thought that we would see someone from the Russian military or from Russian people there, and we were hiding there. We were running from one section to another. Later we left this plant,
and we went there, and that's where we found Russian soldiers. I rushed to them and I fell in a hole, but these guys helped me out. They provided medical assistance to me. They fed us, and of course they were very surprised that we were the only 2 who left and that we were alive. They told us that they were supposed to meet us over the bridge, but we were told, well, they were told that there were no survivors there. But turned out that we survived. Thanks God, the Lord helped us. I thank the guys that also helped us. And they transferred us to Aktubovsk, and after that we found ourselves in the hospital. I had an injury, a fragment.
И у нас тоже мы, когда жили там, у нас бы разбомбило подвал, и сосед
Our
нас
basement was bombed, and our neighbor Igor took us. That's where we lived
до выхода.
until
домах
we
таких,
left.
когда живут люди, по нам стреляли, но мы потом
There
убрали
was
эти надписи, чтобы
a,
стирали, что по нам
there
не
was
стреляли.
a signature that people are living here in our houses, but this signature was taken away. There were the whole families who lived there. They changed several basements. They ran from one basement to another because at first there were some signs that there were people there, but then they disappeared. Two basements were bombed.
Тоже хоронили своих в огороде.
We buried our loved ones in the garden. Auntie Gala was shot by a drone close to the school 17. She was shot by a drone. Our guys took her and buried her. There was another family, the family of Degtярov. First son was killed, and the next morning father was also killed by a drone, and we also buried them at the garden. And then we tried to keep ourselves at the shelter because there were some drone attacks, and we just were sitting at the basements. Without light, without electricity. There was another house. A white house. And there were constant shellings against this house. There was one attack by a drone, and he started to extinguish a fire at the roof, and instantly there was another drone attack. In a nutshell, he also survived. Then he came to the street to take out the rubbish, and he got a leg injury. And immediately he was told to leave, and a car took him. Auntie Luba also was a sick person. She's been working for her life, and turned out that we were the only survivors, and all the rest just died. A neighbor was shot in the head. Sanya Mikhailovsky. I got his head after the shooting. I think that's it.
Thank you very much for sharing with us what you have experienced. This is extremely important for our common struggle for peace. Your Excellencies, now let me give the floor to our diplomatic missions to international organizations, who will talk about their work in communicating to the world community the facts about violations of IHL against the civilians. I'm giving the floor to Geneva, to the head of the humanitarian desk of the permanent mission of the Russian Federation, to the UN office and other international organizations, to Mr. Yevgeny Ustinov. Yevgeny, the floor is yours.
Благодарю вас.
Thank you. Good day, dear colleagues. Today's VTC is dedicated to the most pressing issue of large-scale and systemic violations of the norms of international humanitarian law, with a special focus on the conflict around Ukraine. In addition to quite useful but quite shocking facts and overview that was voiced today, I would also like to highlight two other aspects of this versatile issue, namely the way the Geneva-based international organizations respond to such violations. We regret to state that at the Geneva platform, the violations of the international humanitarian law by Ukrainian armed units has been methodically and maliciously hushed up by the collective West and international mechanisms under their control. You will not hear about the crimes of Ukrainian authorities in the Western statements and their henchman statements in the UNHRC and other international organizations, or the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, just like from international humanitarian agencies and organizations. They all prefer to ignore the suffering of Donbas population, the population of new Russian regions, Kursk, Belgorod, and other regions of Russia. Clearly, it's not in their interest to raise awareness about and give unbiased unbiased analysis of actions by the Kiev military clique, which can be described as war crimes and crimes against humanity. Such stance of sexual international entities cannot be explained, given that our mission regularly provides to the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights and his office, as well as to sexual rapporteurs of the HRC. One of them was invited to our event. We provide them with detailed evidence of the crimes by Ukrainian armed units against the civilian population. We regularly send 100 pages long materials of documented facts of anti-humane actions by the Ukrainian military clique, accompanied with shocking photo and video footage. However, due response by international mechanism is still lacking. As a result of this flagrant indifference, the Kiev regime continues to show inhumane attitude to the lives of civilians and an open neglect for the norms of international law. The Ukrainian armed units continue to shell en masse cities and settlements using huge supplies of Western weaponry. The internet has many videos of tortures and cold-blood murders by Ukrainian fighters of Russian POWs, and these videos of executions are published by the criminals themselves. They clearly brag about their atrocious actions from the legal and morality standpoint. International officials keep silent, and that is self-explanatory. Truth be told, such neglect is shown not only with regard to Russia. The notorious double standards policy and pure political bias have long been the trademark of UN bureaucracy. The signs and repercussions of such a hypocrisy by international officials that shall be guided by the principles of objectivity and impartiality are fully witnessed by many countries of the global south. With regard to supplies of weaponry to Ukraine, including long-range missiles, this issue has several aspects. Humanitarian part of this is extremely important, but that is just one of the dimensions of this serious problem. Indeed, strikes using these weapons against cities and settlements in Russian territory, as well as against civil infrastructure, lead to disastrous repercussions both for civilians and for the activities to provide essential services. But equally important is that the supplies by the collective West of weaponry to the Kiev regime, especially long-range ones, have a negative impact on global stability and regional security. Large-scale supplies of weaponry to Ukraine also have a direct impact on degrading situation in European security, since they protract the Ukrainian crisis and extend the agony of the Kiev regime. In its turn, it results in further destruction of the civil infrastructure, provoking civil casualties in the Russian territory. We should also note that Western supplies are not controlled, and the significant part of this weaponry is resold at the black market and thus is distributed to other regions of the world, including the Middle East. This increases the terrorist threat, and thus it has a direct impact on the humanitarian situation in the conflict regions that I've mentioned. We have consistently reached out to these member states that it is nefarious to continue supporting Ukraine that at the Disarmament Conference, which is the main negotiating platform in arms control and non-proliferation, as well as during the meetings on the Convention on Certain Conventional Weapons. And these efforts have their fruit. Many countries already realize who is responsible for the war crimes against civilians, as well as the factors that prompted Russia to launch a special military operation. In this regard, what is noteworthy is the result of the recent vote at the UNGA Assembly on anti-Russian resolution. It was perceived by a significant part of reasonable states with a high share of skepticism. Unlike this document, more balanced assessments of the developments in and around Ukraine are contained in the UNSC Resolution 2774. We are hopeful that these trends will be reflected in the actions of the UN mechanisms. Thank you for your attention.
Mr. Ustinov, esteemed colleagues in Geneva, we thank you very much for your contribution and co-organization. Without further ado, I will hand over the floor to my neighbor, Mr. Igor Sergeyev, who is the head of the humanitarian group of the permanent mission of the Russian Federation to the OSCE. Igor, tell us, please, what is the situation at this Vienna venue?
Thank you. Excellencies, colleagues, friends, thank you for your presentations. The OSCE is not a specialized platform for discussing international humanitarian law issues, but these problems come within the scope of the organization and its institutions. Information on human rights violations and atrocities committed by Ukrainian armed formations, which is provided by His Excellency Ambassador Miroshnik, is regularly brought to the attention of all OSCE participating states, the OSCE chairmanship, the Secretariat and relevant OSCE institutions on a weekly, monthly, as well as annually basis. We also regularly send to the OSCE country and thematic reports of the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation on human rights violations. At the same time, we are thankful for the information received from the Commissioner for Human Rights of Russia, Ms. Moskhalkova. Unfortunately, the blatant violations of international humanitarian law by Kiev regime formations and foreign mercenaries continue to be hushed up by the OSCE leadership for political reasons. Instead of taking a realistic look at things, the chairmanship is breaching its mandate, including in the Permanent Council, by repeating groundless accusations of the West and spreading politicized propaganda targeting our country. Just one example. The West is still silent on a staged provocation in Bucha in 2022, which has nothing to do with reality. We are not surprised that all so-called evidence of Russian war crimes in Bucha appeared a few days after the mopping up operation, when Ukrainian security service officers and representatives of Ukrainian television arrived in the town. The most important point is that a full-scale investigation into the Bucha tragedy has not to begin. There is still no information available about the victims' names, places of residence, time, location, and cause of death, and autopsy results. Russian authorities approach different structures. Even UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres was requested to use his capabilities and authority to do something quite simple, to obtain a list of the names of those whose bodies were shown in Bucha. We still have not received anything. It seems that leaders of the Kiev region fear an investigation as it could implicate themselves. We will not tolerate fabrications. We will continue to expose fakes and inform about the developments in Ukraine and to the international community, including attempts of the West to manipulate public opinion. Unfortunately, the OSCE is rapidly losing its leadership of the past in the human dimension and its credibility. However, we'll continue to urge the participating states to return to the pattern of dialogue and to drop the malicious practices of meaningless confrontation for the sake of no one. Especially during this year, which marks the 50th anniversary of the adoption of the Helsinki Final Act. Let us remember that the OSCE remains the only forum with a consensus decision-making process. It's a unique representation of both states and civil society sitting at the same table. Thank you for your attention, and let me wish you all a fruitful discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Evgeny, for your contribution and comments on behalf of the permanent mission to the OSCE. And now, on behalf of the Russian Delegation on Military Security and Arms Control, I would like to focus on the violations by Western states of agreements on responsible export control policies when transferring weapons to Ukraine. Since 2014, large-scale deliveries of modern weapons to Ukraine have become an example of the unscrupulousness of EU and NATO member states regarding the situation in this country. Since 2022, the most lethal systems have been sent to Kiev, including manpads and ATGMs, MLRS, etc. Throughout this period, Western states have been deviating from the principles of responsible behavior they themselves promoted when transferring weapons to conflict zones. In particular, the EU common position, and I would kindly ask to show slide 2. Yes, we have it. The EU common position prohibits the issuance of licenses for the export of weapons if this leads to a violation of IHL and contributes to the emergence of or exacerbation of armed conflicts. When making decisions on arms supplies, EU member states must also take into account the risks of weapons entering illegal circulation, and such precedents exist, according to Europol, and the human rights situation in the recipient country. The International Arms Trade Treaty, which entered into force in 2014 and is essentially the brainchild of the EU, requires each member state to assess whether the transferred weapons could be used to commit violations of IHL, acts of violence against women and children. The treaty postulates that a member state should not authorize the transfer of conventional weapons if it intends to use them to violate the Geneva Conventions of 1949, attack civilian objects or non-combatants. Similar military political commitments are included in the OSCE principles governing conventional arms transfers and the OSCE document on SOLV developed here in Vienna. All these agreements clearly did not suit the West and were cancelled by it. The Westerners couldn't help but know that the Ukrainians were using all the weapons and ammunition they had, including for massive shelling of populated areas. The OSCE Special Monitoring Mission has been working in Ukraine since 2014. Therefore, to claim that they did not know is hypocritical. The competent authorities of the Russian Federation document numerous facts of the use of Western weapons and other equipment against the civilian population. The most deadly weapons are supplied to Kyiv by the UK, Canada, Italy, Germany, Romania, and Estonia. The invasion of the Ukrainian armed forces into the Kursk region in August 2024 was carried out with the assistance of Western countries, and this was personally admitted by Zelensky's advisor Podolyak. I mean, military planning, provision of intelligence, equipment, and weapons, among them the Bradley infantry fighting vehicle, the Stryker armored personnel carrier from the USA, the Marder infantry fighting vehicle from Germany, AMX tanks from France, etc., etc., etc. As a result of this adventure, only half of the civilians survived until liberation in a number of settlements in the Kursk border region. On the screens, you can see evidence of other crimes of the Ukrainian armed forces against the civilian population of our country using Western weapons, which is a gross violation of IHL and the above-mentioned international agreements. It is clear that, for example, the flight missions of the missiles are entered by Western specialists. One of the most cynical crimes occurred on December the 30th in 2023, when the Ukrainian armed forces deliberately shelled Belgorod and the Belgorod region with cluster munitions from the Czech-made Vampire MLRS. As a result of this barbaric strike, 5 civilians were killed and 46 people were injured. In violation of the 2008 Convention on Cluster Munitions, the Ukrainian armed forces are actively using cluster munitions, including...
Я прошу прощения, можно пустить презентацию? Она остановилась, если можно.
The presentation has stopped. Could you please launch it?
Большая просьба восстановить представление презентации.
Please start the presentation. The presentation froze. We cannot see it, but we are looking forward to seeing it.
Thank you so much, Moscow. Can you see the presentation now?
Yeah, we can. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. So, in addition, the use of Ukrainian combat drones, including those with Western components against Russian civilians and civilian infrastructure, is outrageous. Since the beginning of 2024, at least 723 civilians have been injured by Ukrainian UAV strikes. According to our data, more than 120 people have been killed. Another aspect of Western arms supplies is the risk of their ending up in illegal circulation from Ukraine, in the hands of nationalist radicals, terrorists, and gangs in Ukraine and beyond. Such facts have been recorded in Latin America, Africa, and the Middle East. At the same time, Western capitals continue to ignore a number of international agreements aimed at minimizing risks in this area, including UN General Assembly Resolution 6240 and the elements of export controls for manpads from 2003, agreed upon within the framework of the Wassenaar arrangement. Ukrainian media have repeatedly noted the desire of their fellow citizens and foreign businessmen to profit from arms supplies to the armed forces of Ukraine. Just think about these figures. In Ukraine, there has been a 40-fold increase in crimes committed with the use of illegal weapons and ammunition. In 2024, the Internal Affairs agencies registered over 11,000 offenses. More than 2 million units of ammunition were confiscated from Ukrainian citizens. The high level of corruption in the Ukrainian leadership and serious violations in the organization of accounting for military products transferred by Western countries have a significant impact on the growth of illegal arms trafficking. It is not surprising that the new head of the US FBI, Patel, expressed his intention to conduct an investigation into the misuse of funds by the Kiev regime. Thus, as a result of the West and Kiev ignoring in favor of solving their political and military industrial problems, the fundamental principles of export control, including control over the end use, Ukraine has effectively become one of the largest centers of the international black market for weapons. In addition, the West turns a blind eye to Kiev's use of supplied weapons in violation of IHL. That is, being a party to a whole array of international agreements, Western countries act contrary to the goals and objectives of the regimes, not only failing to prevent destabilizing accumulations of conventional weapons, but on the contrary, contributing to their formation. At the same time, they blocked the dialogue in the OSCE on issues of preventing the illegal circulation of weapons and ammunition. Just a few words about the participation of mercenaries from EU and NATO countries in the military actions in Ukraine on the side of the Kiev regime. The recruitment is being fulfilled with the active assistance of Ukrainian embassies abroad in violation of the Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations of 1961, as well as official authorities of European states, as in the case of the Finnish Foreign Ministry. It is important to emphasize that mercenarism is illegal. Therefore, in accordance with IHL, soldiers of fortune cannot claim the status of prisoners of war, which some NATO countries are trying to achieve, thereby indirectly recognizing their participation in conflict. In total, since the beginning of the special military operation, over 15,000 foreigners from 115 countries have arrived on Ukrainian territory. Currently, there are about 2,000 legionnaires in Ukraine. The largest groups have been recorded from Poland, Georgia, Canada, the US, Britain, and Romania. They take part in the crimes of the armed forces of Ukraine against the civilian population, and along with the armed forces of Ukraine, they subject Russian servicemen to cruel torture and abuse. They openly post video evidence of their crimes on the internet, in which they castrate prisoners, shoot them in the knees, and finish off the wounded with shots to the head. One of our central tasks at the moment is also collecting evidence of crimes committed by foreign mercenaries on the territory of the Russian Federation. To date, based on the evidence collected, 871 mercenaries are listed as defendants, 652 are on the international wanted list. The Russian side regularly provides irrefutable evidence of the use of prohibited means and methods of warfare by the armed forces of Ukraine, as well as evidence of the outright crimes of the Kiev regime with the military assistance of Western states. We will continue to hand over facts of violations of IHL by the Ukrainian side on a regular basis to relevant international organizations. Crimes mustn't go unpunished. Dear participants, now I would like to open the floor for discussion. I invite all those present to actively speak out on the issues raised today and ask questions to the esteemed keynote speakers, both here in Vienna, in Geneva, and in Moscow. Participants, of course, Donetsk and Kursk will also be happy to give their feedback. Participants joining the roundtable via Zoom may indicate their wish to take the floor by using the raise hand function, and all guests are kindly requested to introduce themselves first and then proceed to the substance of their comment or question. So, is there anyone wishing to take the floor? I see here in Vienna we have Mr. Nikola Maric. He is the representative of the Russian youth in Austria, musician, and a very active participant of our political military events here in Vienna. I would kindly ask our interpreter to assist Mr. Maric in his speech delivering. Yes, Maria, please, would you be so kind to assist Mr. Maric? Mr. Maric, would you please, yes, turn on your mic.
Уважаемые дамы и господа, уважаемые коллеги.
Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, distinguished colleagues.
Сегодняшняя тема – это не только международное гуманитарное право.
Today's topic is not only international humanitarian law.
но и защита национальных интересов, что
but
особенно
protection of
актуально
national
в
interests,
условиях
which
современных конфликтов.
is becoming increasingly relevant in modern
Правовые нормы
conflicts.
порой трактуются в ущерб
Legal
суверенитету.
norms are interpreted to the detriment of sovereignty and national interests of states.
Россия, как ответственная мировая
Russia,
держава,
as a responsible
сталкивается с рядом проблем
global power, is
применении
facing a
международного
number of
гуманитарного права,
problems
которые
in
напрямую
the
затрагивают
implementation of
наши
international
национальные
humanitarian
интересы.
law, which directly affects our national interests.
Первым и важнейшим вопросом является
The
несоответствие
first and the most
стандартов
important issue
международного
is
гуманитарного права
the
реальной политической
non-correspondence of
ситуации.
international humanitarian law to the real political situation.
Когда западные страны используют
When
это право
Western
для давления
states
на Россию в международных
use
делах,
this
мы видим ясные попытки
law to
вмешательства в
exercise
внутренние
pressure
дела,
upon
прикрывая
Russia,
гуманитарными
and we
соображениями.
see attempts of interference into domestic affairs
В
under
таких
humanitarian
случаях
concerns.
международное гуманитарное право
In
становится
such
инструментом
cases,
политического
international
давления,
humanitarian law
а не
becomes
защиты прав
the
и свобод.
tool
Кроме
of
того,
international pressure
неправомерное
and
вмешательство
not
в
the tool
вооруженные
of
конфликты,
protecting
поставка оружия, санкции,
freedoms and
блокировка,
rights,
односторонние действия
illegitimate
без учета
sanctions,
мнений всех
unilateral
сторон
actions
только подрывают
without
авторитет
consideration of
международного гуманитарного
the opinion
права,
of all parties,
ставят под угрозу
only
безопасность
undermine
наших граждан. Россия
the
всегда
current
выступала за
situation.
мир.
Russia has always advocated in favor
Международные
of
нормы
peace,
используются для оправдания
but nowadays international
дестабилизации
norms
ситуации на мировой
are
арене.
used to
Россия должна активно
justify
защищать свои
illegitimate
интересы,
actions on the international arena.
укрепляя
Russia
позицию на
should
мировой
actively
арене и
defend
обеспечивая
its
соблюдение
national
международного
interests
права
to
таким
strengthen
образом,
its stance
чтобы оно не
and guarantee the
становилось
implementation of
инструментом
international
манипуляции.
law so that it doesn't become a tool for manipulation.
Мы уверены, что только в
We
условиях
are
справедливого
convinced
и беспристрастного подхода можно достичь мира
that
и
when
безопасности, где
an
будут
impartial
уважены интересы
approach
всех
is
стран,
implemented, we can
включая
achieve
нашу
peace
Родину.
and
Всем
security
спасибо за
for
внимание.
all, including Russia. Thank you very much for your attention.
Mr. Maric, thank you very much for your valuable contribution to our discussion. I see Mr. John Varley. Varley, yes, thank you so much. Wishes
Хорошо,
the floor.
представляю себе. Я буду говорить по-русски. Я
I
бывший
will
корреспондент
speak
New York
Russian.
Times и
I'm
Bloomberg
the former
News,
New York Times
но
and
я давно
Bloomberg News
не работаю
correspondent,
в большой
but
журналистике,
I'm
потому
not
что
working
я говорю
in
правду,
big journalism
что
because
происходит
I
у
speak
вас
the
на другой
truth
территории. Мой
about
вопрос
what is
очень
happening in the
простой.
new
А
regions,
главные
and
террористы известны. Мы знаем, кто они.
my question
Виктория
is
Нуланд, Джейк
very
Салливан, Джо
simple. We
Байден.
know the
Мы знаем,
terrorists,
кто они.
Nuland,
Я хочу задать
Biden,
вопрос к
and others.
представителю
We know that all of them.
Министерства иностранных дел.
Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Are you going to bring to criminal responsibility these criminals? Perhaps it sounds extraordinary because they have some kind of immunity as they are high-ranking political officials, but I believe that they should be brought to criminal justice, even if it takes 100 of years. My second question, during the negotiations with the Trump team, are you going to raise this issue? Everything that we heard today, have you already communicated all of these points to Mr. Rubio? Is the Trump team aware of the number of victims of this terrorism? Let me reiterate that this is also the American terrorism. As a U.S. citizen, I'm outraged. These are my two questions. My third one, I would like to make a brief commentary. Please, representatives of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, you should insist on the reimbursement, hundreds of billions of US dollars from the United States and European states. The United States should be responsible for their crimes. Thank you.
Если позволите, я тогда, наверное, начну комментарий по
If I
этому
may,
поводу.
I will start my commentary. First and foremost, thank you very much for such an emotional question. We can see clearly that you are deeply concerned with the matter. And I would like to explain and to clarify our position. Our delegation in the OSCE, in the UN Security Council, They have massive information on Kiev regime militants and soldiers of the crimes committed in the Russian regions. This information is transferred not only to the organizations that I have enumerated, but also to human rights organizations. But unfortunately, this information is swept under the carpet and it is put aside. On many international platforms, they say that this is lies and that they do not trust this information. Just look the video recordings on the UN area formula, where the situation in the Kursk region is analyzed in detail, and many references to Kiev regime crimes as well. The response of European states resembled to a position of an ostrich, and we are willing to provide any information to all parties who are willing to learn this information on what is going on in the new regions and the regions which are facing military action. As part of any settlement negotiations, the matter of victims, the matter of committed crimes cannot be bypassed. This is our clear-cut position, and the data which was provided today is was not given just for the mere fact of giving it. The investigative committee of the Russian Federation is carrying out the inquiry. More than 4.5 thousand of criminal cases, criminal proceedings were launched, and more than 400 of criminals faced criminal punishment from 8.5 to life imprisonment, and this is only the beginning. We will make for the requirements, and these crimes are funded and supported by Western states. They sent lethal arms killing civilians. They paid for the services of international mercenaries. We have discussed all of this during today's teleconference. Our actions are concrete. They contain clear information. We will never diverge from our position to come to justice and to bring into responsibility all those who perpetrated the crimes and the violation of the norms of international humanitarian law and using illegal means and methods of warfare. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Is there anyone wishing to take the floor with comments or questions? I see none. In this situation, let me please, I see the esteemed representative of the DPRK. Yes, and sir, you have the floor. I would like, yes, to kindly ask Mr. Maric to give you the microphone. Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you so much for giving me the floor. So, dear chairperson and participants, first of all, I'd like to appreciate and also express my thanks to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Russian Federation and the delegation of the Russian Federation to the OSCE Forum for Security Cooperation to host this conference, and also express my belief that this conference will attain the desired end by the concerted efforts of all the participants to this conference. Dear Chairperson, the tragic armed conflict taking place all over the world including in Europe and Middle East, which are amid great public concern, are not only seriously threatening the world peace and security, but also causing a global humanitarian disaster by taking away the precious lives and the homes of tens of thousands of innocent people. In particular, the Zelensky clique, who had carried out systematic genocide and ill treatment against Russians in Donbas region for many years, has been committing heinous crimes by brutally massacring innocent civilians in various regions of Russian territory, including Kursk Oblast, since the outbreak of the Ukraine crisis. The large-scale massacres committed by the Ukraine regime against the Russian civilians are a clear violation of international humanitarian law and constitute a brutal crimes against humanity and war crimes. And therefore, I think that those crimes must be sternly punished by the progressive international community. Dear Chairperson, taking this opportunity, I'd like to remind that the United States and the West, which are instigating the Zelensky clique into bloody massacres, must also take due responsibility as accomplices in flagrant violation of international humanitarian law. As everybody knows, the United States and West are not only fostering the massacres by providing Kiev with internationally prohibited weapons, for example, the cluster bombs and the long-range weapons, but also patronizing Zelensky clique by describing their massacres as a self-defense action. It is none other than the United States and the West that caused the Ukraine crisis by inciting the reckless eastward expansion of NATO in disregard of the legitimate security interest of Russia and its territorial integrity. The United States and the West are also the arch criminals, causing the innocent civilians killings and catastrophic results by providing the Ukraine with lethal weapons and equipment in disregard of the unanimous demand and the aspiration of the international community for the only peaceful settlement of the Ukraine crisis. The inhuman crimes of the West can never be escaped stern punishment by history. Dear Chairperson, it is the invariable stand of the DPR of Korea to oppose and reject any act of denying the international justice, disturbing the global peace and security, and undermining the life and welfare of humankind. The DPRK will continuously support and encourage the just cause of the Russian people to defend their sovereignty, security, and territorial integrity in line of the spirit of the treaty on the comprehensive strategic partnership between the DPRK and Russian Federation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, Distinguished Ambassador, for your support and for your invaluable contribution to this event. Your statement is very important. Thank you so much. Dear colleagues, is anyone wishing to take the floor? Let me please ask a question that I would like to send to our Geneva colleagues. Correct me if I'm wrong. Now the UN Human Rights Council session is ongoing in Geneva. Dear colleagues, would you share with us whether the topic of IHL violations by the Kiev regime is somehow highlighted during the session, and if yes, in what vein?
Thank you for your question. Indeed, currently we have the 58th session of the UN Human Rights Council underway. A great deal of human rights issues are being discussed, including the session plans to have at least 2 discussions on the situation in Ukraine. The first one is a discussion, a so-called dialogue with an international independent investigation commission on the developments in Ukraine that is clearly an anti-Russian mechanism that was created by Kiev and by its Western sponsors. And the second is a dialogue with the High Commissioner for Human Rights. It is held at each session, and during this dialogue, Mr. Turk presents his overview of the situation in Ukraine. Clearly, as we address the Human Rights Council, we regularly highlight violations of the international humanitarian law by the Kiev regime. The same topic is raised by our like-minded nations, the number of states of the global majority. When it comes to the West, the rhetoric is quite clear. The ideas that they voice are well known and they do not differ. We're supported, we're heeded to, and with each passing session, the discussion on the situation in Ukraine and the way it is presented by Western states and the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, they lose their momentum and they are used by the West. Hence, as I've already noted, the countries of the global majority find this approach unlikable, an approach that they do not quite like, and they pay heed to what we say. That's the way I would like to answer your question. Thank you.
Many thanks, Evgeny. I see that we are having a question from Ms. Asya Zuan. Asya, you have the floor.
Добрый день, уважаемые организаторы, коллеги. Спасибо всем за
Distinguished organizers, colleagues, thank you for this opportunity to join you. I represent the Bulgarian edition of Newsfront International News Agency. I have 2 questions, if I may. As far as we can see today, indeed, we have seen atrocious footage. I, as journalist, saw it myself, but you cannot get used to this footage. What I clearly don't understand is something that you've mentioned. Actually, the international human rights organizations not pay attention to this situation, and they make it seem that they ignore it. I'm talking about the war crimes of the Kiev regime and the crimes against humanity. Atrocious evidence was voiced, and a question: In your view, what is needed to revive or to reset the mechanism of the international humanitarian law in such a way so that it would operate efficiently? And the second one, it's rather a proposal, not a question. In Europe, there is an idea floating in the air, military assistance, and it looks quite secure, safe, and not emotional. However, today we were able to see the repercussions of this military assistance. In this regard, to bring the participants of the international community from various countries, including from Europe, so that the citizens of these countries do not be part of an accomplice to the atrocious crimes. Could we initiate at the level some kind of informal formats, such as VTCs and other formats, where we could show such evidence, video footage, so that the European community could have access to this information? Because I believe that nobody will be indifferent if they know for sure how the situation is ongoing. It's a step towards public diplomacy to attract people so that they could impact their authorities. Because I can give you an example from Bulgaria. In many countries, there were mass protests against arms supplies to the Kiev regime. Nevertheless, this regime continues to purchase weapons. So we can affect the situation to have the opportunity to raise awareness to the European community, maybe to have this every 3 months. Witnesses could join these conferences, they could share their experience, what they lived through, and real crimes would be demonstrated, crimes by the Kiev regime, and the people could understand that these words, military assistance, mean actually atrocious crimes. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Ms. Zwan, for this question. And I would like to ask Mr. Rodion Miroshnik to join us and to kindly comment on this issue, which, as far as I understand, is within his responsibilities. Ambassador?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the question and for your suggestion. When responding to the need to demonstrate the evidence and the footage, thank you very much for your support. I believe that today we begin these efforts thanks to our delegation. We have an initiative to organize a platform where we can demonstrate photos and photo evidence. We can provide. Unfortunately, I don't have the sound. Can you hear me well now?
Слышно меня?
Can you hear me?
Теперь слышно, да?
Now you can, right?
Ambassador, we can hear you from Vienna.
Слышно меня, да? Я могу продолжить.
So you can hear me and I can go on with my presentation. Yes, now we can hear you. Thank you. Thank you very much. I believe that first and foremost, thank you for the words of support that we should have and organize the platforms providing the evidence and the information on the crimes committed by the Kiev regime, where it will be accessible to the general public. We harbor no illusions. We understand quite well that on many mainstream platforms, this information is blocked, including on the platforms of international organizations. When we raise these questions within the international organizations. The first question posed by the Western states is, why do you waste our time? Why do you raise questions we are unwilling to hear? This is the position adopted by a wide number of states, which provide this very vague international military aid, because this very definition includes being an accomplice of implementing illegal means and methods of warfare and violation of international humanitarian law. Today, I provided concrete facts that there are American HIMARS, Czech Vampires, Polish MLRS weapons. They were bought and they were purchased and they were used to commit strikes against civilian sites, for example, shopping centers. And this military equipment is used when airstrikes are launched against these civilian sites. This means that they are accomplices to these crimes. The Czech Republic has started the fundraising for the provision of billions of artillery shells, and many civilians died from the strikes perpetrated with the NATO caliber munitions. These drones are dropped on civilian buses, civilian infrastructure, schools, hospitals. People are killed as a result of targeted drone strikes provided by the Western states. Our delegation in Vienna demonstrated the photos, saying that they saw that military equipment is made in Sweden, made in Canada, and many other states. We have many thousands of evidence provided by civilians who suffered from drone strikes sent by the West to Ukraine as the parts, saying that Ukraine produces these drones itself. Ukraine does nothing but assembles them, and all these parts are sent by Western partners. Partially, the Western states are responsible for the lost lives of many civilians, of many women and children who are sending this, so to say, military assistance to the Western taxpayers. They allow to send their millions in taxes to buy arms, which is sent to buy weapons and to fund the military forces of Ukraine. Commit targeted attacks against the Kursk region, Donetsk and Lugansk People Republic, and all the regions of the contact line. As we liberate the territories, we face the increasing number of violation of international humanitarian norms, human rights norms, and pure torture of civilians who had been under the control of Ukrainian armed forces for many months. It refers both to Ukrainian citizens and Russian citizens in Donetsk and Lugansk regions who have suffered the pressure of Ukrainian armed groupings. I would like to extend my gratitude to people who witnessed the key regimes and spoke today during our discussions. Thousands of words said by officials could not replace the statement of witnesses who have been through this tragedy.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. I can see there is an active participant here in our Vienna studio, and please, madam, you have the floor.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Yeah, thank you. My name is Maria Pomerantseva, the delegation's translator, and I have a question for John Varoli, if possible. John, can you hear me?
Yes, yes, I hear, yes.
Oh, thank you. Please tell me, what's your take on the true intentions of the new US administration, given the constant contradictory messages and statements from Donald Trump himself on the Ukrainian crisis and the prospects of its settlement? Thank you.
Okay, thanks. First, I'll speak in English. First, I want to just say a few comments to the ambassador and other members of the ministry. Just to give you some of my experience living all these years in the U.S., where we live in an absolute false reality. And this false reality is strictly enforced through censorship, total control over information. So I have friends in major media. I have friends in the major American media, and they are scared. They know what's happening. I mean, what we discussed here today, they know about it. So these are journalists at major American and British media, but they are afraid to speak the truth because it will mean immediately they are fired. And they openly say that the Western, well, American and British secret services totally control their news agencies. And therefore, they create this entirely false reality where only a handful, maybe 1%, 2% of Americans and British, maybe they know the truth. Some information gets through, but very little. So unfortunately, the sad truth is that, yes, 95% of Americans, British, Europeans, they live in this false reality. They don't know what's happening. And breaking through this informational blockade is obviously a very, very crucial task. Now, thank you for the question about Trump. Actually, I give interviews quite often about this topic, and I want to say, I'll just answer it briefly. You know, the first and foremost thing, Trump is now going after his enemies. That's the first thing on his mind. He wants to destroy his enemies, whether they're in Canada, whether they're in Washington, D.C., or in Europe, or in Kiev. So Zelensky is one of his enemies because, don't forget, the first impeachment was because of who? Because of Zelensky and Kiev. So, and as you know, they tried to destroy Trump's reputation. Then they tried to put him in jail. They impeached him twice, and then they tried to kill him twice. So Trump is a man who is angry, very, very angry. He's furious, and he wants to destroy his enemies. So everything that's happening now, we have to, of course, there's a lot of different factors at play here. I mean, of course, there's economics and geopolitics, of course. But first and foremost on his mind is he's got to destroy his enemies because otherwise they will destroy him. So this is just a basic matter of survival instinct. So, and, but then the second other factor is that the Russian armed forces have won. They have won. Your army, your military has won. You have defeated a coalition of 40 countries, right? There's roughly 30 NATO countries, and then there's South Korea, Japan, and other American allies who have been helping. So 40 countries marched against Russia, and the Russian military has defeated them. And Trump respects force. He respects force. He respects strength. And this is another reason. This is why Trump wants to negotiate, because he knows he's losing. The U.S. is losing. Every day it's getting worse and worse for the U.S. So when you're losing, it's better to negotiate quickly, right? Trump always says, quickly, quickly. We got to negotiate peace quickly. Yeah, because he knows every day it gets worse and worse for America, for the USA, and for NATO overall. And of course, you know, I don't even mention Ukraine because Ukraine is nothing but a proxy. It's just an inconsequential pawn in proxy. This is the war of American liberal elites, American liberal globalist elites. This is their war. European liberal global elites. This is their war against Russia. Ukraine is just a pawn. It's just a tool. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Varoli, for your assessments. Colleagues, we still have some time left. Are there any volunteers to comment or to ask questions to the speakers? Yes, please. Maria, would you be so kind to give our esteemed guest the microphone? Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for the invitation. My name is Patrick Poppel from Austria, but I'm an expert on the Center for Geostrategic Studies in Belgrade. And I visit Donbass many times before the special operation starts. So we should not forget that the war starts 2014 in Ukraine. And on my travels to Lugansk and Donetsk, I had many meetings with people that talked me about the war crimes of the Ukrainian armed forces. And I think it's very important to collect all these war crimes since 2014, because today we had a good view about what happens in Kursk region and also in Donbass in the last months. But it's also important to collect all this information since 2014, because there are many war crimes happened there, and we should try to put all these criminals for international court. This is very important, and this is my wish for the auditory. Thank you very much.
Vielen herzlichen Dank, Herr Poppel. Colleagues, I see that Mr. Maxim Gardner is wishing to pose a question via chat. So, Mr. Gardner, we are waiting impatiently for your question. Meanwhile, I'm asking the audience here in Vienna and our online participants whether they also have some questions or comment. Mr. Gardner, you can use your microphone and ask your question publicly. We are still waiting for some time. Good. If there are no questions and no comments, no comment from, yes, we see something.
Thank you very much. I would like to make a short commentary. I would like to thank everyone for taking part in today's session. First and foremost, many thanks to our delegation to the OSCE for organizing this event. I believe it is of paramount importance. It fills the niche which is cleaned up and which represents nothing but the background noise with respect to the crimes committed and perpetrated by the Kiev regime. I mean the statement made by Madam Kaja Kallas, who says that no Russian women, no Russian children, no Russian civilians are killed, and to contradict, to contrapose to her statement are the facts we presented today. I would like to personally thank the authorities of the Kursk region and our mission of the Foreign Ministry in Donetsk People's Republic, and to people who summoned the strength and came to see us and to share what they faced when they experienced the manifestations of the Kiev neo-Nazism. Thank you very much to everyone, and thank you very much for the journalists. I believe they will communicate the information which was voiced today. I believe that we can break through this wall of silence they're trying to surround us with, and to block this information for common people, for common taxpayers who live in the West, who live in the global South states, and who seek the alternative point of view, which would be just and objective regarding what is going on along the contact line. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for participation.
Many thanks, Ambassador. So we are concluding our event. Excellencies, dear colleagues, let me briefly summarize what we have discussed. Today, we were able to see once again that the Kiev regime, with the complicity of the West, continues to violate IHL with impunity. This has been happening for a decade, since the very beginning of the anti-terrorist and, in fact, anti-people operation against the civilian population in Donbass. The invasion of the armed forces of Ukraine into the Kursk region of the Russian Federation has given this situation a new dimension. Previously, Kiev used the image of a victim in the international arena, but the attack on civilians in the Kursk region has finally debunked this lie. It is also important to note that the International Court of Justice rejected Ukrainian insinuations that the DPR and LPR are allegedly terrorist organizations, and this only confirms the anti-people nature of Kiev's actions. Unfortunately, we have to state that both in Geneva and in Vienna, international organizations, as well as representatives of the collective West, methodically hush up the topic of violations of IHL norms by Ukrainian armed groups. This includes the massive supply of weapons and ammunition in violations of a whole range of international agreements, which only fuels the Ukrainian conflict and leads to suffering among civilians. But apparently, it is not in the interests of international structures to publicly disclose and objectively assess such actions by Kiev, which can be qualified as war crimes and crimes against humanity, especially since they are actually being committed with the connivance of Western states. In the conditions of the information blockade that the West has imposed on Russia, it is necessary for those who have suffered from the atrocities of the Ukrainian armed formations to have the opportunity to speak out and tell what the Kiev regime has been doing for about 10 years. And today we have given them such a chance. It is a great pity that the doors of international organizations are closed to them. They are, witnesses to the crimes of the armed forces of Ukraine. They are categorically refused the floor, in particular at the OSCE Forum for Security Cooperation, and I can say it from the experience of our delegation. In turn, Russian diplomacy will continue to bring to the attention of international structures and platforms evidence of crimes by Ukrainian armed formations against the civilian population. Concealment of facts of violation of IHL by Kiev, as well as massive supplies of weapons to Ukraine, negatively affect international stability and security. In this regard, our country is making all necessary efforts to ensure that crimes do not go unpunished. We hope that more balanced assessments of what is happening will be reflected in the activities of international organizations. And with this, dear colleagues, I also would like to stress that sober assessments of the situation in and around Ukraine have already been reflected in UN Security Council Resolution 2774. On behalf of the delegation of the Russian Federation, I sincerely thank all our guests for their interest in the very difficult topic that was raised today. I thank the esteemed speakers from Donetsk, Kursk, Moscow, and Vienna for important comments, questions, and reports, and all our esteemed interpreters, both in Moscow and in Vienna, for their linguistic support of the event. Thank you very much for your participation, and I wish you all a successful week. The teleconference is closed.
Thank you. Thank you.